Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today. This beautiful autumn day, first day of autumn, first Sunday of autumn. And if you haven't been out there to check it out, you owe it to yourself. It is amazing. And since it's Sunday, it's officially a day of rest and reflection. Time to stop and kind of forget about all the crud in our lives and stop and smell the roses. And what better place to do that than right here and right now? So welcome. Welcome to this congregation, where for over half a century now, we've been seeking to foster community, to grow our spirits, to serve others, and to work for justice. We're very glad that you've joined us this morning in our sacred cyberspace, and hope that here you will experience love, acceptance, and hopefully inspiration. After our service, please feel welcome to stick around for fellowship and conversation. Our monthly Touchstones themes strive to help us shape our days and guide our journey. This year's overarching theme is repairing the world. It's a big task. And our September topic is reason. With racism, poverty, climate change, and justice, the world needs our help and compassion. In academic fields like science, philosophy, law, and so many other fields found in the real world, reason has been and is a powerful tool in the search for truth and the accumulation of wisdom. Yet, given fake news, alternative facts, falsehoods, conspiracy theories, and deception, reason is under assault from many places. Our guest speaker this morning is one of our very favorite ones. She's been with us many times, Emily Quarles-Mowrer. And Emily is the child of a Unitarian Universalist minister and has been preaching sermons of her own since 2006. She currently lives in Gilbertsville with her husband, her 2 daughters, 4 cats, and 1 very outnumbered dog. The name of her sermon today is With a Humble Heart. The scientific method is built upon the idea of changing our understanding in order to fit the facts, rather than choosing the facts that fit our ideas. However, as humans, once we have accepted a belief, it is very difficult to remain open to data that conflicts with our established understanding. Intellectual humility is another name for the ability to admit when we are wrong. As Brian Resnick wrote in his 2019 article for Vox, when we admit we are wrong, we can grow closer to the truth. Join us as we explore the concept of intellectual humility. Now, let us enter into worship together. Our musical prelude this morning by our awesome musician, Avi Wisnia, is one he picked out specially for us.
We're going to start this morning with one of my favorite songs by the Indigo Girls, a song that reminds us that there's more than one answer to the questions that we ask, and there's often more than one path to any of those answers that we seek. Trying to tell you something about my life. Maybe give me insight between black and white. And the best thing you ever done for me is to help me take my life less seriously. It's only life after all. Well, darkness has a hunger that's insatiable, and lightness has a call that's hard to hear. I wrap my fear around me like a blanket. I sailed my ship of safety till I sank it. I'm crawling on your shore. I went to the doctor, I went to the mountain. I looked to the children, I drank from the fountain. There's more than one answer to these questions, pointing me in a crooked line. And the less I seek my source from some definitive, the closer I am to find, yeah. The closer I am to find, yeah. I went to see a doctor of philosophy with a poster of Rasputin and a beard down to his knee. He never did marry or see a B-grade movie. He graded my performance. He said he could see through me. I spent 4 years prostrate to the higher mind. Got my paper and I was free. I went to the doctor, I went to the mountain. I looked to the children, I drank from the fountain. There's more than one answer to these questions, pointing me in a crooked line. And the less I seek my source from some definitive, the closer I am to find, yeah. The closer I am to find, yeah. I went to the doctor, I went to the mountain. I looked to the children, I drank from the fountain. Yeah, we go to the Bible, we go through the workout. We read up on the Bible, we stand up for the lookout. There's more than one answer to these questions, pointing me in a crooked line. And the less I seek my source from some definitive, the closer I am to find, yeah. The closer I am to find, yeah. The closer I am to find, yeah. The closer I am to find, yeah.
Thank you, Avi. That was fine. Please feel free to join me as I read our words for lighting the chalice. As we light this chalice, may all who gather here be filled with joy and hope, and filled with compassion and love. Our opening words this morning are from Galileo Galilei. In questions of science, the authority of 1,000 is not worth the humble reasoning of a single individual. Our message for all ages was this morning was handpicked for us by Emily, our guest speaker. It's a good one.
Hi there. Today's book is called The Girl Who Never Made Mistakes. For Beatrice Bottomwell, Friday began like any other day. She matched her socks and, of course, she put her shoes on their proper feet. She remembered to feed her hamster, Humber, his favorite food, broccoli. And when she made a sandwich for her brother Carl's lunch, she used exactly the same amount of peanut butter as jelly. When she stepped outside to greet her fans, she didn't forget to say good morning and thank you. They asked if she made her bed. She had. They asked if she forgot to do her math homework. Nope. What about today's talent show? They asked. I'm ready, said Beatrice with a smile. After all, her juggling act had won 3 years in a row. Most people in town didn't even know Beatrice's name. They just called her the girl who never makes mistakes, because for as long as anyone could remember, she never did. Unlike Beatrice, Carl made lots of mistakes. He ate his crayons and drew with his green beans. He danced with his hands and played the piano with his feet. Carl loved to make mistakes. At school, Beatrice was on a cooking team with her two best friends, Millie and Sarah. To make their giant rhubarb muffins, they needed 4 eggs. Beatrice went to the refrigerator and carefully chose the biggest, eggiest eggs she could find. But on the way back, her legs slipped out from under her. The eggs went flying. Beatrice was about to make her first mistake. But she didn't. That was close, thought Beatrice. Sorry, Beatrice. I dropped a piece of rhubarb. Oh, why shouldn't it, really? For the rest of the school day, Beatrice could not stop thinking about her almost mistake. On her way home from school, Beatrice watched Millie and Sarah ice skating in the park. "Come join us," said Millie. "It's fun," said Sarah. Beatrice watched them slip and slide on the frozen pond. Millie and Sarah laughed as they wobbled on the ice. "No, thanks," said Beatrice. At supper, Beatrice barely touched her food. "Is everything all right, kiddo?" asked her father. "I'm worried I'd mess up tonight," said Beatrice, "and everyone will be watching." "Worry? You don't make mistakes," he said with a smile. Beatrice tried to smile too. After supper, Beatrice got ready for the talent show. First, she woke Humbert from his nap. Next, she got the salt shaker from the kitchen table. Finally, she filled a balloon with water. The school auditorium was packed. Beatrice felt her stomach jumping around inside her. Beatrice waited for her juggling music to begin. "That's her! That's the girl who never makes mistakes," said a woman. "Oh, we know she'll be perfect," said a man. When the music started, she tossed Humbert into the air. Next, she added the salt shaker. And finally, the water balloon. Beatrice didn't miss a beat. The crowd clapped with delight. But Beatrice noticed something odd about the salt shaker. The specks falling out of it were not white. Achoo! Humbert was so surprised by his sneeze that he grabbed the water balloon with his claws. Kablooey! Humbert, pieces of water balloon, and the pepper rained down on top of Beatrice. For the first time in as long as anyone could remember, Beatrice made a mistake. And it was a big one. The music stopped. Beatrice didn't know what to do. Cry? Run off the stage? The crowd sat stunned. They couldn't believe that the girl who never makes mistakes made a mistake. Beatrice looked up at Humbert. He looked back at her. His hamster fur was soaked and speckled with bits of balloon. Beatrice let out a giggle. The giggle grew into a chuckle, and the chuckle became a laugh. The people in the crowd looked at each other and then back at Beatrice. They began to giggle, then chuckle, then finally roar with laughter. Beatrice and the audience laughed until they couldn't remember why they were laughing. That night, Beatrice slept better than she ever had. In the morning, no fans greeted Beatrice. When she got dressed, Beatrice, for no reason at all, put a polka dot sock on one foot and a plaid sock on the other. Beatrice and Carl made sandwiches. This time, they put the peanut butter and jelly on the outside. They called it an inside-out PB&J. Lunch was messy and delicious. Later, Beatrice found Millie and Sarah skating in the park. They fell a lot and laughed. Now, people no longer called her the girl who never makes mistakes. They just call her Beatrice.
Well, thank you for picking that out, Emily. That was great. We all make mistakes. It's how we deal with them that defines us as people. For our musical interlude, Avi has chosen a song by Joni Mitchell.
Rows of flows of angel hair and ice cream castles in the air and feather canyons everywhere. I've looked at clouds that way, but now they only block the sun. They rain and snow on everyone. So many things I would have done, but clouds got in my way. I've looked at clouds from both sides now, from up and down, and still somehow each cloud's illusion. I recall I really don't know clouds at all. Moons and Junes and Ferris wheels, the dizzy dancing way you feel as every fairy tale comes real. I've looked at love that way, but now it's just another show. You leave 'em laughing when you go, and if you care, don't let them know. Don't give yourself away. I've looked at love from both sides now, from give and take, and still somehow each love illusion I recall. I really don't know love at all. Tears and fears and feeling proud to say I love you right out loud. Dreams and schemes and circus crowds, I've looked at life that way. But now old friends, they're acting strange. They shake their heads, they say I've changed. Well, something's lost and something's gained in living every day. I've looked at life from both sides now, from win and lose, and still somehow it's life's illusion. I recall I really don't know life at all.
Thank you, Avi. That was beautiful. Now for her reading, it gives me extreme pleasure to welcome Emily Quarles-Mowrer. You're muted, Emily.
Good morning, everyone. It's so nice to see all your smiling faces this morning. So this morning for a reading, I have one from the Braver Wiser, it's a really fun resource that you sometimes can find on, you can either sign up for it on email or you can just find it on the uua.org. This is a really good one. It's by Ryla D. Matson. It's called Big Shoes to Fill. It starts out with a quote from Lift Every Voice and Sing. Have not our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers sighed? She writes, it baffles me how my kids are just fine running around with no shoes on. Rocks and dirt and sticks and grime all adhere to their feet. I wear my shoes from the time I wake up until I climb in the bed at night. They may not be my daily running around shoes, but something is always on my feet. It drives me up a wall to see my kids barefoot, but I keep my mouth shut. So I've read articles about how it's not good to walk around the house with the shoes you wear outside, or how it's healthy to be without the constraints of shoes on those little feet. I've also read about diseases that find their way into your body and your bloodstream through cuts and sores on your feet. I realize that both can be right or wrong. I refuse to walk around barefoot, but I also refuse to dictate whether my children do. My dad wore shoes. He grew up in rural Georgia, where shoes were a sign of wealth. The population of the town, 500. Most were farmers who couldn't afford shoes for all of their children. My grandfather did well as a farmer and even had several sharecroppers. If he had enough money for all 7, 8, 9, or whatever of his children to wear shoes, then they were going to wear them. Don't let him catch you without them on. That mentality stuck with my father. If he could afford to buy us shoes, we best have them on. So I never take mine off. Not because there's some type of status symbol, but because I'm used to it. In an odd way, it makes me feel closer to my dad, who passed away many years ago. I look at their bare feet and my shoes and remember, it's okay to let go. Just because something was a certain way for many years doesn't mean we have to continue. Traditions and habits can be changed or broken, and it's not always bad. Doesn't mean we didn't learn or like what we did in the past. Just means we moved on to something else, and that's okay too. I appreciate the path that my grandfather paved, but also recognize that I can start or add to his path in my own way and still honor the road he paved the way for. Spirit of life, may we never forget the road our ancestors paved for us. May we honor and uplift them. May we remember that we too will one day be ancestors to those generations that follow. And may they be proud of and honored by the road we have paved for them, whether or not they choose to follow it.
Thank you, Emily. I think I've been inspired to go out and walk around my yard in my bare feet. And now it's time for our offertory. And for the month of September, our split plate recipient is the Bucks County Coordinated Disaster Relief Fund, which has been set up to help our neighbors who have been badly affected by the recent severe storms with flooding and tornadoes. Operated by the United Way of Bucks County in partnership with Penn Community Bank, the relief fund launched with $35,000 in donations. The fund will assist low-income homeowners impacted by the storms who are unable to secure aid from other sources. The nonprofit will coordinate with Bucks County and other nonprofit partners to ensure that funds are used efficiently. And of course, it's all tax deductible, so please be generous. As always, you can donate using the links provided in our website and our e-newsletter, or if you prefer, you can send us a check, cash, or diamonds. It's all good. Now, Emily will give her sermon with a humble heart.
I almost did it twice, but I remembered I unmuted. Yeah, you never know when a mistake is going to pop up on you. With a humble heart. When I was little, I read a book of science experiments for kids. There was a section on perception, and it included things like biting into a lemon and then noticing if your mouth was producing more saliva in response. Quick hint, it did. There was an experiment that I found fascinating. It was an experiment that showed where your blind spot is. As you're probably already aware, our eyes can see because of light reaching the rods and cones on the retinas of our eyes. And there's a place in your retina that's called the optic disc, where there are so many blood vessels and nerve endings that there is no room for the light receptor cells. There is literally a hole in your field of vision. And the reason you don't notice this hole in your everyday life is because our brains have adapted to cover it up with an approximation of what should be there based on the surrounding visual input. So if you want to do this experiment, like the one that I did as a kid, what you do is you take a piece of paper and you put an X in one section, and then you draw a target over on the side about 6 inches away. Then you cover up one eye and you hold up the paper in front of your face and you look at the target, but you look at the X, but you keep that target in your visual field. And when you get a certain distance away, it disappears. That X will travel into your blind spot, and your brain will just see white paper and use the white paper to guess about what else should be there. Well, I was fascinated by this as a kid, and I would sit in my bed and make my light fixtures disappear. Whoa. It was like I had an invisibility superpower. I can turn things invisible. Watch. As adults, when we think of our blind spot, we're probably talking about that place where you can't see a car if you're trying to change lanes. We kind of think of it as a liability and not a superpower. And it's true, our blind spots may be a liability. Not just our physical blind spots that we're pretty adept at remembering and accounting for, but our intellectual blind spots, the places where our brain gives us shortcuts towards knowledge and judgment. As humans, we may not be as good at recognizing our intellectual blind spots. Dr. Peter Samuelson explains in his lecture, Humility and Cognition, our brains have two different ways of thinking that can come to an answer. In psychology, there are a bunch of different people who describe it, but they come in basically two broad categories. There's type 1 thinking, which is readily accessible ideas that come from one's own experience. You might call them like snap judgments. And type 2 thinking, which is kind of deliberate and analytical ideas that they do take into account your perception, but they also try to take into account perceptions of other people and other sources. So even when we take the time to analyze our type 1 thinking and try to make a more reasoned, thoughtful type 2 decision, we can still be steered astray. Cindy Lamott writes for The Cut in February 2017 article, "We generally believe that we are better and more correct than most other people. This is found to be true in politics, in religion, in fashion, in lifestyle. You know, in our community, we tend to remain pretty open-minded about other people's lifestyle choices. For example, someone else may eat with gusto a food that makes you shudder, but we're not going to call someone out for that. It's personal preference. But we probably aren't escaping that fallacy that Lamott cites. There was a study in the Personality and Social Psychology Journal that found most people in all of America rate themselves as being less biased than average. Yes, we are all above average, just like in Lake Wobegon. But, that's understandable because while we understand that bias is innate to everyone and that heuristic type 1 thinking is what kept our ancestors alive when they had a split second to choose between running away or being eaten, no one wants to think of themselves as only using that type 1 heuristic thinking. No one wants to think of themselves as biased and to take on all that social and emotional baggage of that bias label. No one wants to think of themselves as being wrong. Catherine Schultz, a staff writer for The New Yorker and author of the book Being Wrong, Adventures in the Margin of Error, gave a TED Talk at the 2011 conference that was called On Being Wrong. And early in her TED Talk, she asked the audience a question. She asked them, how does it feel emotionally to be wrong? Think about that yourself. How does it feel when you're... Well, she gets various answers. She gets dreadful. She gets a bunch of thumbs down. She gets embarrassing. And then she adds her own possible answers. She adds things like devastating or revelatory, even funny. I mean, for example, the story we just heard, she thought it was really funny when she made a mistake. But then Schultz makes a really good point. She tells the audience, you are answering a question about being wrong, but it's not the one I asked. You are answering the question, how does it feel to realize that you are wrong? Right now, each of you sitting in front of your computers, just think about this for a second. Can you think of something that you are currently wrong about? A mistaken belief that you hold right now? Of course not. Maybe you can think of things that you used to be wrong about. In fact, there may be something seared into your mind. It may be a time when you realized that you were wrong. But right now, if there's a fact that you misremembered or an assumption you made that isn't quite right, or an opinion that you hold that if you had more information, you might change it, well, you're not aware of that. As Catherine Schultz says, it does feel like something to be wrong. It feels like being right. Just as we all have physical blind spots, we also all have intellectual blind spots. She goes on to say, our internal sense of rightness is not a reliable guide to what's going out in the external world. In an episode of This American Life, it's an early episode, it's number 293, there is a conversation between Christy Kruger and Alex Bloomberg. And in this conversation, Kruger says, in my head, a unicorn wasn't really any different from a zebra. I mean, in terms of believability, I think the unicorn's really ahead of the dinosaur. When Bloomberg asks her to, clarify this, she says, well, think about this from a kid's perspective. Dinosaurs are these really, really large, monstrous animals roaming the earth. And then you have a unicorn, which is basically a horse with a horn. So then Kruger tells the story of realizing her error. Somehow a discussion of endangered species came up, in which I posed the question, so is the unicorn endangered or extinct? And basically there was a big gap of silence. And then everybody laughed. And then that laughter was followed by more silence when they realized I wasn't laughing. And then I was like, oh, unicorns aren't real. Oh no. Yeah, it doesn't feel good when you realize an error. Or you can think about Justine Sacco, I might be mispronouncing her name, but you might remember her. She was the PR executive who made a tasteless joke on Twitter about going to Africa just before she boarded an 11-hour flight to visit her family in South Africa. And that single tweet made her infamous and blew up her entire life. And, even without thinking about the kind of mistakes that might trigger cancel culture, we have in our own lives instances that prove to us that making a mistake can feel wrong or feel shameful. When you think about grade school, you may remember almost instinctively knowing that papers with a ton of red ink on them were somehow less worthy than papers that came back pristine. You may be in a house where you grew up with a Bible proverb from chapter 16, verse 18. Pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. Our culture tells us in ways small and large that being wrong means there's something wrong with us. So if we all have intellectual blind spots, if we're all wrong sometimes, why does it feel so awful to realize when we've made a mistake? Shouldn't we have an innate understanding that, as Alexander Pope said, to err is human and to forgive is divine? Well, unfortunately, no matter how universal the experience of making a mistake may be, our culture is not super forgiving. If you spent any time on social media, you may be familiar with dealing with people who are wrong. We all know how to identify people who are wrong. They are the ones who disagree with us. So that may not really be the case, but when we come across someone who has a view that doesn't mesh with ours, it's not the same as ours, we start by making some assumptions. First, we may assume that, they're just ignorant. They don't really know. So if I just explain to them, then they will agree with me. They will become no longer wrong. Okay, well, sometimes that doesn't work. And when it doesn't work, then we think, they must be idiots. I'm sorry. I just have to assume that they just can't get it because it's just, they can't. And then if they keep being wrong and you can't excuse them for being stupid anymore, you have to say, well, I guess I'm just going to assume that they're evil. I'm going to assume bad intentions. So I looked up another Bible verse about this one. Not that I really read the Bible that often, but this is super, super relevant. Timothy, 2 Timothy, chapter 2, verse 23. You can see that I don't quote stuff very often. It says, have nothing to do with foolish, ignorant controversies. You know that they breed quarrels. That's like all of Facebook right now. So how do we keep from making these assumptions? Well, that brings us to intellectual humility. And just hearing the term intellectual humility, it gives you a hint as to its definition. Intellectual makes us think it must have something to do with the mind or with our thought processes. Humility, that brings to mind other related descriptions like modest or self-effacing or meek or lacking in vanity. So Dr. Peter Samuelson, who we heard from earlier, and Dr. Ian Church collaborated on the free online learning site Coursera to create the first module of this course on intellectual humility, as well as on a book called Intellectual Humility. And it's like, if you have a chance, it's completely free. So it's a really fun one to watch. But in the first module, Dr. Ian Church defines intellectual humility. His definition is the virtue of accurately tracking what one could non-culpably take to be the positive epistemic value of one's own beliefs. So that's a little wordy. Let's break it down. First, Church considers intellectual humility to be a virtue. Virtue comes from the Latin virtus, which means, among other things, moral excellence. So Church considers intellectual humility not just a thought exercise, but as a key behavior that allows one to move skillfully through the world. Okay, so let's tackle positive epistemic status. Well, epistemology is the study of knowledge. It's sometimes considered to be like if you have a Venn diagram where there's truth here and belief here and they overlap. Where that overlaps is knowledge, and that's what epistemology is studying. So positive epistemic status is justified knowledge. It's beliefs that you can rely upon with some measure of certainty. And then there's one other factor in there, non-culpably. So if you have culpability, it means it's your fault. So if it's non-culpable, it means that it's not your fault. So what this is getting to is intellectual humility is being able to see clearly and judge accurately how tightly you should hold on to your beliefs based upon the things that you are aware of. And if you're not aware of something, then that's not your fault. So you wouldn't be considered not intellectually humble for maybe believing something that a trustworthy source says that later turns out to be false. So if I'm going to use a somewhat controversial right now kind of thing to say, but for example, with mask wearing, at the beginning, the CDC, which is a very trusted source, was saying, meh, we probably don't need them. And we non-culpably went out believing that, meh, we probably don't need them. But the CDC later changed their mind and found out through more information that maybe they could be helpful. So now our intellectual humility says that we should, if we trusted them the first time, that we should continue to trust them. So church's definition places intellectual humility as kind of a happy medium between undervaluing one's beliefs, which he calls intellectual servility, and overvaluing one's beliefs, which he calls intellectual arrogance. So to explain the difference through an example, let's assume we have three researchers. We have Dr. Dakota, who is highly knowledgeable about, let's say, octopuses. And he has written several papers and works in the Monterey Bay Aquarium and comes into contact with octopus every day. And then we have Dr. Finley, who has a doctorate in, let's say, pharmacology, but has read a whole lot about octopus and watches videos on YouTube. And then we have Dr. Emerson, who has also published several papers and works in the field of octopus at a different laboratory on the other side of the world. So let's say that Dr. Dakota and Dr. Finley and Dr. Emerson were all having a discussion. Let's say Dr. Dakota is intellectually servile. So if Dr. Finley asserts that, oh, all octopus are able to solve a Rubik's Cube, Dr. Dakota says, they can manipulate it, but don't solve it. And Dr. Finley insists, so Dr. Dakota says, okay, sure, I'm going to change my mind and believe you. Dr. Emerson, in the same discussion, says, octopus don't solve the Rubik's Cube. They can manipulate it. Dr. Dakota's right. So Dr. Finley would be the arrogant one. He'd be overvaluing his YouTube videos that show the octopus is solving a Rubik's Cube. Dr. Emerson would be in the middle. He values as one ought, is what they say. He values as he ought his own experience. And then Dr. Dakota is intellectually servile in not valuing his own intellectual knowledge highly enough. So that that kind of helps. So going back to Lamott's article in The Cut, she cites that studies indicate that people with high intellectual humility are better learners and more able to engage in civil discourse. And she even quotes a hiring manager at Google who believes that intellectual humility is one of the top qualities that he looks for in a candidate. And Science Daily published an article in 2011 about a Baylor University study that indicated that the honesty and humility character trait, which is what intellectual humility is measured by, is important in job success in the field of healthcare. People high in that trait were most highly rated by supervisors, and that trait was more predictive than other traits, even other personality traits that one would assume would go well with healthcare, like agreeableness or conscientiousness. Tanel Porter, a postdoc researcher at the University of California, Davis, comments that to exercise intellectual humility, we have to expose ourselves to opposing viewpoints. We have to listen to our friends and our family, and sometimes even strangers with different points of view. Porter believes that having a mindset that our intellect is static over time, it's a given quantity, like being born with 2 lungs or 10 fingers, rather than a growth mindset where our intellect can change over time, like our muscles grow when we exercise or our flexibility increases when we stretch, can make a difference in our ability to exercise intellectual humility. So if you're thinking about our earlier discussion about mistakes, that kind of makes sense. Like if we say, okay, River and Tatum each feel that they were born with a certain amount of intellect. Let's say River did well in school and they are already comfortable in the things that they know, and they might not want to take a class on a newly offered subject where they might fail and not be smart anymore. Let's say Tatum didn't do so well in school and holds strong opinions and feels that anyone who disagrees with that worldview must either be showing off or mocking them. So that's how a non-growth mindset or a static mindset on intellect can affect your ability to display intellectual humility. If you feel like you are stuck where you are, then you are less likely to grow and change because you feel like you're stuck. So how do we encourage that growth mindset? The website Character Lab was founded in 2013 by researchers and educators in order to help kids to strengthen their social and emotional learning. One of the founders is actually Angela Duckworth. She did all of that grit and determination work. She's really great if you ever read her stuff. They have, on this website, they have a playbook on intellectual humility to help parents and educators and caregivers to embody and pass on this kind of wisdom. Their overarching goal is to make all of the things that come out in the papers accessible for people who are actually on the ground doing the work. Because how many of you go out and read the Journal of Psychology for fun? I know I don't. So this is a website where you can go to get that kind of insight in a way that's easy to digest. So they have a little questionnaire that helps you to think about intellectual humility in your own mind. So when you think about yourself, how many of these things are true? I question my own opinions, positions, and viewpoints because they could be wrong. I reconsider my opinions when presented with new evidence. I recognize the value in opinions that are different from my own. I accept that my beliefs and attitudes may be wrong. In face of conflicting evidence, I'm open to changing my opinions. I like finding out new information that differs from what I already think is true. Now, I know when I read that, I was thinking, sure, I'm open-minded. I'm just like all the other open-minded. I'm above average. I'm from Lake Wobegon. We're all above average. But when you think about what you can learn from being able to do this, they actually have done studies where they have people who have those opposing viewpoints, like they get people who are victims of gun crimes together with people who are gun advocates, and they have them talk together and really engage with each other. They have people who are abortion advocates and people who are anti-abortion advocates, and they have them get together and really talk to one another. And what they don't find that people necessarily change their minds, but they do find that people are able to emotionally connect with someone that they don't agree with. And sometimes just having an emotional connection can make you less likely to fall into that tree of assumptions, those assumptions that, well, this person, if I just explained it enough, they would agree with me. If they don't agree with me, well, then they're just wrong. I need to just write them off. So there are ways that you can incorporate these kinds of views into your own everyday world without having to really go out and engage with people on a one-on-one basis where you're really fighting with people. And easy ways to do that are, if somebody asks you a question and you don't know, just admit when you don't know. It's okay to not know, even in our society where you're supposed to be able to know. You can say, hey, we'll look it up. Let's find out. I know this happens to me all the time with my kids. They say something like, how many times can a gecko's tail grow back? I don't know. Let's go look it up. You can appreciate other people's insights, letting them know when they've raised a point that you hadn't considered. So even if they're saying something you don't agree with, you can still say, I never looked at it that way. And another thing you can do is you can be willing to let people know when you've changed your mind. There's another study that I read about where they were talking about people on the internet. One of the reasons that they are talking about the internet having kind of a chilling effect on intellectual humility is that once you have written down an opinion about something, it feels much harder to go back and change it. Just like if you pick something up in the store, it feels much harder to put it back down and not purchase it, which is why my children are not allowed to touch anything in the toy aisle. So they did a study where they had people separated into 3 groups, and they fed them some information, and then they had them do one of 3 things. They had them think about their opinion based on the information they were given. They had them write down their opinion, but destroy it immediately. So they wrote it down on a keyboard, and then they erased the keyboard. Or they wrote it down on a keyboard in an email, and then they sent the email in. Then, this wasn't the end of the experiment, then they gave them another presentation where they found out that, some of the information we gave you last time was wrong. So what do you think happened? You're right. The people who had to write down and submit their information to someone else, they had a lot harder time admitting that they were wrong because it was on record that they thought something that wasn't true. It's a lot harder once you have actually committed yourself to go back and say, nope. So in order to foster intellectual humility, you have to be willing to let people know when you changed your mind. Sarah Norad writes for the Elephant Journal, which is a Buddhist take on life. She writes, mistakes are not a punishment that we should be made to feel in endless shame. They're blessings that allow us insights. They can open us to tender, honest places in ourselves. They can teach us about who we want to be. Although intellectual humility sounds like a simple concept, it involves threading the needle between holding on and letting go, between respecting the past and being excited for the future, between speaking our own truths and listening deeply to the truths of others. But if we can do it, if we can honor our lived experiences while being flexible enough to hear that other people don't see things the same way, maybe we'll be the ones leaving big shoes for future generations to fill. Maybe we'll be able to make our sandwiches inside out with the jelly and the peanut butter on the outside. Maybe the less we seek our source from some definitive, closer we'll get to find. So be it. Amen. Salam. Shalom. Blessed be. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Emily. You've given us a lot to think about today. I know I hope that I can keep an open mind. Now is the time in our service when we recognize each other and lift each other up with love. So let us be fully present and listen with open hearts. If you would like to share a joy or a sorrow, please go to the bottom of your computer screen and click on reactions and then click raise hand. And this will help us find you and help you to unmute. And of course, if you don't have a computer, you're not using a computer, or that just doesn't work for you, just do it the old-fashioned way. We'll find you eventually. For everyone's benefit, please be brief. All right, not all at once, please. Wow.
This is Karen. I just wanted to share a sorrow. A couple of weeks ago, I mentioned a cousin who was in the hospital. They had his celebration of life a couple of days ago. So sadly, we lost him. And then another sorrow that I wanted to pass along with friends who have a 4-year-old grandson who had some emergency surgery this past week, very unexpectedly. He's doing well now, but that means he has a health challenge to manage, probably lifelong. But I just wanted to put those things on everybody's heart. So if you can send out healing thoughts for everybody, that would be much appreciated.
Thank you for sharing that. In the same vein, I guess 3 days ago, we put the mortal remains of our good friend and longtime member Dave Stow into the ground, and it's a very beautiful, brief ceremony. And I think about Dave a lot. Well, if we have nobody else, then we will continue with our service. Whether or not you shared today for your joys.
Oh, wait,
Well, wait.
we suddenly have
Who?
Georgianne.
Oh, Georgianne.
Hey, I'm just going to share that I'm doing something a little risky today. We have a new family in our neighborhood that just moved in with several boys about the age of my boys. And so even though my son, I have one living at home right now, doesn't think this is a good idea, I've invited that family and 4 other family of boys over for hot dogs and hamburgers today. I don't think everybody's going to come. I think we'll be 12 to 15 people, which my family thinks is outrageous. But I mean, it's only hamburgers and hot dogs and sweet corn. I'm a little nervous because this hopefully will be a good experience for these boys. I think they should know each other. So wish me luck.
Well, definitely good luck and good for you. That sounds like a lot of fun. Got a perfect day for it too. All righty then. Whether or not you shared today, for your choice, we in this community join you in celebration. For any sorrows or concerns, may you feel our sympathy and our compassion. Let's pause for just a moment of gratitude, silent meditation, and prayer. For our closing song, Avi will perform one of our favorite hymns.
Wherever you are today, even as we stay muted, I invite you to join me in singing our closing hymn, number 1008, When Our Heart is in a Holy Place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we trust the wisdom in each of us, every color, every creed and kind, and we see our faces in each other's eyes, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we tell our story from deep inside, and we listen with a loving mind, and we hear our voices in each other's words, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we share the silence of sacred space, and the God of our heart stirs within, and we feel the power of each other's faith, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place.
Thank you, Avi. Please feel free to join me as I read our closing words and we extinguish our chalice. We have basked in the warmth and beauty of this flame and this community. As the chalice flame is extinguished, let us carry its glow within. Let us kindle new sparks within these walls and beyond. Our service is concluded. Please feel welcome to stick around for our very informal coffee hour. And you can now unmute yourself and join in the chat function.